speaking of representation, right? This is what we've been talking about the whole time. Things being represented. Well, Dungeons and Dragons is also racist right now. This is as well. It's been a long time that this has been in the works and there is a kind of argument for it in that racial essentialism has always kind of been an aspect of Dungeons and Dragons. Hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to direct your attention to the aesthetics range of merch that we have on the store. These are beautiful images that I think work really well as posters or mugs. So if you want to support us, going over to the merch store at shop.lotus.com is easily the best way other than signing up on the website. For example, orcs are defined as being an evil race. So again, we come back to the morally uncomplex ability to massacre a tribe of orcs to make sure that they don't come and eat your children.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
That seems pretty good for a game.
The problem with it is genetic determinism.
What?
Orcs are racially evil.
Yeah.
So it's in their genes.
Yeah.
So it can't change.
Okay.
That's bad for the left.
But I just made this all up in my head.
Yes.
But I thought white people were genetically evil according to the left.
No. They think that nobody is genetically evil. White people choose to be evil. Right? But the problem is the
Russo born free and
everyone is of course perfect. And the orcs as a sentient humanoid fall under the rubric of a rational being. And so the fact that they are racially determined to be evil and stupid makes extra credits make videos making comparisons to the real world.
Yeah. For people who don't know, there's a YouTube channel called Extra Credits. They used to make videos about gaming. Then all of a sudden, for no reason, no one asked them to, they made a video arguing that the orcs are black people.
And you can see where this line of thought has come from, as you can see here. Orcs are human beings that can be slaughtered without conscience or apology. That's not true. Orcs are not human beings. Orcs are orcs. They are racially different to human beings in the game of Dungeons and Dragons. But as you can see from the modern left, as far as they're concerned, anything that has or is capable of rational thought is a human being. Because a human being isn't the body and the mind, it's just the mind. And so anything that could be considered rational is also, as far as they're concerned, a human being, which is why they love the automatons, why they love the bugs, why they love all of the portrayed enemies that we have.
Doesn't that make dolphins and crows human beings?
You think they won't arrive? You think they're not arriving at that point?
This is an interesting...
anything that thinks can be considered.
There's an interesting alternative way of looking at this, which is, therefore, anything that is not sufficiently conscious is not a human being.
Which is why it's okay to murder a fetus.
A fetus or somebody who's heavily disabled, vegetative state, or, eugenics kind of immediately appears out of this.
Could you just... all the alkies? I don't...
At any point you're drunk enough that you no longer count as a human being, murder is off the charts.
Stalin just comes and gets you.
And so the issue with this is they're like, well, you've created an other. It's like, yes, there are things that are not human beings. In Dungeons and Dragons, of all places. Can you believe it? And they're like, but that's racism. I guess it is, actually. I guess it's true, right? There are two different races. They have innate characteristics. And the left are like, right, I just can't accept this.
You can't accept made-up racism.
No.
I made up a race and then was racist towards it in my head. And you're salty about this.
Yes. Literally, as this is a fantasy writer called N.K. Jemisin, a titan of modern fantasy. I've never heard of them. They says, as kind of sort of people, they're not people, they're orcs. They're orcs. Orcs are the fruit of the poison vine that is human fear of the other. The only way to respond to their existence is to control them or remove them. Based. That's exactly why I have them in my fantasy campaigns.
That's how I feel about spiders and mosquitoes.
I don't know. I feel like if I were living in this universe in which there were genuine, there's the question of, are all orcs evil? Put that aside.
Technically they are.
But according to this, they are.
Well, they were.
If orcs are not predisposed to be all of them
predetermined
to be evil, if some of them were good orcs, I would feel like I have some moral duty to them, even though they are not my species.
Yes, and that's what they're trying to carve out, because you'll notice the issue is about recognition again. If all orcs are evil, then no orc has a choice not to be evil, right? That condemns the entire race as being an irredeemably evil thing. And the modern liberal mind can't take that because of the lack of choice. What you're saying is the orcs are not moral agents, even though they're rational beings. And that is an anathema to what a modern liberal is. So they hate it. And that's what all of this, you'll see as we go through, all of this comes down to the inability to make choices against a biological reality.
Wow. There's a softer criticism I suspect they would make as well, which is if fantasy is portraying that there are group tendencies, and I think fantasy does portray group tendencies, and I would maybe controversially say group tendencies exist.
It's crazy.
Amongst real humans, there are...
Well, that's where they're mapping this onto.
But I guess the fantasy exaggeration should not be confused with like it's not a wolf whistle.
It's not a rhetorical argument against real world groups, I think is what you're getting at.
I think so.
Because it's not to say, I mean, it's not to say you should be drawing the metaphor from the fantasy that could be entirely self-contained in its own pocket universe, as we talked about earlier, and something that's happening in the real world. So they say in June 2020, when Black Lives Matter protests swept the country, right? So we began talking about how it's bad to be racist against orcs, and now we're talking about Black Lives Matter.
You brought that up.
Yeah.
For what reason?
Well, the D&D team in 2020 said their 50-year history of characterizing orcs and drow as monstrous and evil is painfully reminiscent of how real-world ethnic groups have been and continue to be denigrated. Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Where
these real-world groups are just like these fantasy groups I made up in my head. They're not.
Who said that? That's just not right, and it's not something we believe in. It's like, but nobody said that. You literally were sat there, everyone's quiet, and you're like, you know what? I think we should stop being racist to the orcs. I think they're black people. Like, what? Why are you saying that? What? No one thought that. Everyone thought that orcs were non-human. And it's like, okay, yeah, but orcs are human beings. No, they're not. Why did the beginning of this article begin with that line? They're not human beings, you maniacs. But anyway, that's what they're saying. Like,
to circle back to what we were talking about right at the beginning of the podcast with like the bit you build a fantasy world, it means something.
Yes.
I think the reason that certain science fiction universes have such importance and power is because they aren't made arbitrarily.
Yes.
People who put them together are very thoughtful people, and it's not an easy enough methodology to just glance at a property, make a random connection that like I interpret it this way, and therefore my interpretation is perfectly valid, right? The construction is quite intricate, the way that pieces work together, and sometimes it's putting together a very high-minded archetypal, Petersonian, Jungian thing. Sometimes it's a comment on it is a representation of a historical event.
Well, that's
battle.
That's what you're hitting on. It's the idea of a story is that it is a rhetorical representation of reality and an argument of how reality would be were the premises of the story as actually how reality is. And so that's what they're really, they can't help but make the comparison to the real world out of the story. And in fact, they say here, fantasy worlds are definitionally made up. There doesn't have to be racism, yet in some of fantasy's most cherished texts, it's almost always present. It's like, so what they're saying is, look, if the world was this way, there would be racism. They're like, yeah, but you didn't have to make this world racist. It's like, that's because you care so much about this subject. Like, other people might care about other things. And there's a great quote in here, quote, "No humanoid is naturally stupid or naturally evil."
That's kind of a wild...
What if I make one up in my head and say it is?
It's a wild metaphysical point to make.
Yeah.
No humanoid.
Yeah, it's not even humans. Humanoid.
Anything human-looking.
Yes.
Can't be evil.
That's our constituency. That's
across any possible imaginable world.
Exactly.
Are the Skaven Are they?
I mean, I would say they're naturally evil. They're not stupid, are they?
Kind of. Pretty stupid to stab your friend in the back while he's working on your project.
See, this is just a judgment call you're making. But the point is, this is the standard from which they work. And so they look at your fantasy world and go, well, you know what? This makes me feel uncomfortable because it would imply a kind of genetic determinism, which would imply that actually the moral choice and agency of the will is actually not the supreme factor in every deciding case. Sometimes things are physically in a way that can't be modified. And this drives them mental. So anyway, moving on. So 2023, there's a racism scandal in Dungeons and Dragons, of course. Would you like to know what the racism was?
Not enough brown people?
No. There was a race called the Hadozee. I've never even heard of these. Who were described as sentient beings with monkey-like features who were captured and enslaved by wizards.
Oh, for God's sakes.
Monkey-like features.
Yeah.
That doesn't, to me, that doesn't bring anything to mind. So
Yeah,
what
That
did they
brings
say?
monkeys to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I just assume they're little monkeys.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But these were called racist.
Yeah.
And of course, the fact that they were enslaved by wizards was a problem.
Did they go to zoos and say, you've got some monkey-like creatures in your zoo? This is a racist zoo.
You've got them in a cage?
Yeah.
But the thing is, right, actually, it's not about mapping these onto reality now. Right now, it's about the event of the slavery itself.
Mhm.
So, for example, they've got comments in here. Is it okay for me to call the Dragon game racist now? Because the Hadozee are effing atrocious, and the fact that this was released is unconscionable. How did no one at Wizards of the Coast, who's the company that makes it, read over the Hadozee origin being like, yeah, they were created to be slaves by a bad wizard, but saved by a good wizard, and now they like to work alongside elves who barely acknowledge them as people. So that's the point. It's about recognition of equality. And if a race or a group begin in a position of inequality created as slaves, then this, again, just bursts this kind of moral bubble that they're trying to live in.
Could we talk a little bit about media literacy? Because
Yes, we can.
if you feature something in your franchise, whatever it is, book, video game, movie,
The story.
the framing of it, the way that it's presented, can be a comment from the author about it positively or negatively, or it could be a background element that is of no significance. It's completely ambiguous, the perspective of the writer. So if you have racism in your game and you as the creator are anti-racist,
Could be a commentary on racism.
you can have the guy who's racist then go and kick a dog, and everybody hates the guy who kicked the dog.
Yeah.
You see those. That's like a very simple example. Or
It's a very cheap example.
Conversely, if you were racist and wanted racism in your franchise, and you had the racist character who then like strokes the cat
dog
and
and
gave money to
feeds
charity,
him.
and the music was like delightful the whole time, and he's just there like putting out all these censorable
He's walking
words.
down the street, just walking.
He's doing the Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Right, that's both of those things feature racism, and yet one of them is a strong statement for, one of them is a strong statement against, and I imagine like Tarantino might just feature it as like it's a feature of history. Yeah, it's not. I'm not supporting or against.
Well, that's a great point, because again, the purpose of a fictional universe is to tell a particular story, and if you can't have the hero or protagonist do something against injustice because you are forbidden from portraying injustice, how are you demonstrating his heroism? That's the point of having an unjust world that's transformed into a just world through the actions of the hero. This is where the virtues come out. And so
but people really don't believe in heroes.
Apparently not. The world should have always been good and was never made good, according to these sorts of people. But how long do you think it was until Wizards of the Coast apologized for this?
No.
Oh, it was almost the next day.
Wow.
We're so sorry. We're so sorry. God, we're sorry. We want to acknowledge and own the inclusion of offensive material. We failed you, our players and our fans, and we're truly sorry.
How?
I don't know. Because
what was wrong?
They included a scenario, where the players could liberate some slaves.
Well, we're terribly sorry. Won't happen again. More slaves next time.
Slaves should stay in their bondage.
Well, as you can see,
violating property rights is something we don't stand by. We believe they should have been paid for their property.
As you can see, they issue some errata, which just retcon the entire backstory of that.
Okay.
But anyway, so what this led to is the abolition of race mixing in Dungeons and Dragons.
What?
Go on.
They really are going all southern, huh?
Very much. But as you can see, they're getting rid of the half races because of racism.
Wait, what? Hold on. So they've established that races equate in like fantasy races equate to real world races.
Yes.
And then the next step is that they ban the two races from having an offspring. That goes against their moral
segregation code. Now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Say Wizards of the Coast.
Do you think this is just Wizards of the Coast deliberately annoying the people who complain?
No.
They're going to set up an orc ethno-state away from all the elves and dwarfs.
Orc Kanda, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Wizards are going to do. And so this was just hilarious because this was, of course, try and get around the game's allegedly racist past.
Okay.
Right? So they say in most versions of D&D, it was possible to create half-elf and half-orc characters. As the name implies, these characters split both the physical traits and attributes of their two base races, humans and elves and humans and orcs. In other words, these characters physically looked like a combination of orcs and humans or elves and humans, and their stats attributes were also representative of both parent races. And now you see why they had a problem with it. Because what they're saying is, again, it's
genetic.
Racially essential that orcs are stronger than elves, and that means that you've got a racist game. Because it actually takes the time to distinguish between the physical characteristics of one against the physical characteristics of another. And so they're like, okay, but we hate that physical characteristics are an aspect of the real world.
Mm. I find it quite distracting in the kind of modern iterations of fantasy where you don't have there's like an internal logic in a well-constructed fantasy like Tolkien, where you see
the halflings are racially short.
You kind of take your premises. What would the world be like if this existed? I'm just going to logically follow it through. This is how the world, and you buy into it because it's all got a kind of coherence and it all makes sense. But when you don't reflect, it's just childish and boring. I feel like just aesthetically terrible.
It's also untrue. I mean, like it would be totally untrue that there'd be no physical difference between an orc and an elf in a game, in a real world that had orcs and elves in. Obviously, there would have to be. But this is the problem with like the liberal ideal that has a sort of the original human. And so, okay, maybe when it comes to actual human beings, that makes some kind of sense, even though maybe it doesn't. But when you start saying orcs are human beings too, and then like rest of the original position has to erase the distinctions between orcs, elves, and halflings, it's like, okay, what are we even doing? This is just a total homogenization of everything down to character.
Why not just call everyone human?
Exactly. Or just, individual.
Why not just live in the real world at this point?
I know. Why am I even playing Dungeons and Dragons?
If two tall people have a baby, it's likely to be a tall adult.
Genetically determined to be a tall adult.
But the reason that we consider all the humans to be of equal moral worth is because of a deep fundamental, from my point
Christian
of view,
perspective, it's a spiritual.
It's that humans were created in the image of God.
Yeah.
I think even from
orcs created in the image of God.
Well,
it's not in the Bible.
Iluvatar was foiled by it's not. Yeah, so it's a fantasy world. So Tolkien, being Catholic, thought this all through, and he had very good answers to these questions.
Yeah.
But even from a secular genetic perspective, the human diversity around the planet is not enormously great. The people are similar to each other. We tend
radical position here.
Yeah,
people are kind of samey.
Well, I kind of want to sort of straddle both lines. Same thing with gender. Men and women clearly are different from one another in very substantial and unarguable ways, I would say. However, across most attributes, men and women are similar to one another. And
but this comes down to the liberal fetish for the sovereignty of the reason. It's like, well, look, I want to be able to choose against my biological reality because otherwise I'm trapped within a kind of flesh cage and I hate it. And that's what this all comes down to. I mean, they literally like, oh, well, we hate like half anything because half it's biologically essential.
Well, yes, and if freedom is your basic good,
exactly,
like you run into, okay, we've kind of made society as free as we can. What can we do about physics? What can we do about biology?
It's and that's what the entire transgender movement is predicated on. And so, anyway, let's get on to disabled representation. Because again, this is another one of those points where it's like, you know what? It's just going to come up against some real barriers in the suspension of disbelief. For example, I don't really believe they're going to be handy-capable dungeons.
Right? It feels self-defeating because if you can complete a heroic quest, and as a disabled person, why do you need any societal assistance?
Well, there is that, but also it would be a different story.
Right,
Frodo being carried up Mount Moria.
He was
Mount Doom.
vertically challenged, right?
Sure, but like
were.
If Sam was in a wheelchair, it would be a different story.
I do think the fact that the hobbits could take on a battle against an orc is a slight deviation, like from my previous rule about like reality.
Possibly, but anyway.
But the wheelchair stuff, they're just going to lie in the same way they don't within Doctor Who. They were like, all of a sudden, everything's wheelchair accessible, and the wheelchairs hold, I don't know, guns.
Yeah, and so obviously they're like, well, we have to have wheelchair representation in fantasy. It's like, look, I'm not unsympathetic, but the point being is you can't suggest that the dungeons are as representative, inclusive, and give as much recognition to disabled people as, say, the liberal democracy in which you live.
Right. OSHA's not visited.
Yeah.
Third level down in the.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like Francis Fukuyama again has a great point on this, where he's like, there are two choices. We could make things for disabled people, or we could make sure that each building has a wheelchair entrance. And we chose to make sure that each building has a wheelchair entrance. So disabled people realize we didn't think of them as a lesser person because of something tragic that happened to them, like a car accident, whatever, and that they were welcome in wider society because it wasn't a commentary on their moral worth. Yes, that's all completely true. Now, we're not playing Dungeons and Dragons in a liberal democracy.
Right.
We're playing it in a tyrannical orc, like evil empire. Now we've got to go climbing, Mount Doom or whatever. Do the rules of the liberal democracy still apply? And these people are like, of course they do. It's like, then why are we invading them?
Yeah,
right. Fantasizing about being disabled as well.
Well, it's
like the dude who's disabled isn't sitting there like, oh man, it'd be so cool if I was still disabled.
Well,
Dungeons and Dragons.
Apparently, for these people, it is right. But look at the expressions on the art that these people make for themselves. I mean, I particularly like this one. Just like, I kind of, don't get me wrong, the art itself, the style is beautiful, right? But I'm kind of taken out of the experience of engaging in the aesthetic play of pretending that I might be in danger, because that person doesn't really look like they're about to get their skull bashed in by an orc. And actually, there's something kind of gross about it, isn't there? It's like, what happened? Well, we sent the disabled person down the dungeon. They got their skull crushed by an orc.
We put the pregnant women on the front line.
Yeah, no, literally. But, and like the art itself, the person doesn't look like, I'm in danger. No, they look like they're engaging in something that everyone engaged in where there's no danger whatsoever. Right.
I guess that a hero has always been the idealized person, right?
Yeah.
You in past times, it would have been muscular, six-pack, athletic. I think the modern mind, actually, if you're able-bodied, there's a part of you, or if you're not a part of a minority, there's a bit of you which is actually, I'm broken and wrong because.
Well, the thing is, it's not that there couldn't be a good story about someone who's disabled doing something heroic, right? It's that they would face a different series of challenges. Like if you're engaging in combat with orcs in the dungeon, you would look a lot more like the people at the back who look like they might actually get hurt. Whereas the person in the wheelchair is looking like they're not going to get hurt because they get some sort of universal recognition in society. And therefore people give them consideration that other people wouldn't consider. Like, I mean, this person, I think, should be looking like they're about to die. But in fact, this person looks like they're about to play basketball or something, right?
Yeah.
The necessary tone to a lethal encounter to make me think, oh, there's an element of danger here is definitely missing on this person's face.
Interesting.
And so I'm not into this.
Mhm.
I don't think, this is about someone who's about to engage in mortal combat. I think this is some Karen who's been like, no, you've got to let Jimmy play with you or whatever. It's like,
Chat makes a good point, which is, man, I live in a world where magic is real and we have healing magic, yet I'm
This
still
is-
wheelchair bound.
yes, this is another point that the level 1 healing spells mean that you're not disabled anymore, but whatever, right?
But do you think the people who want to watch this media and play themselves have the same disabilities?
Yes, a lot of them do.
Interesting.
And this is about recognition.
Okay.
Of that. And that's why you represent disability in D&D with the combat wheelchair. Someone wrote some rules for a combat wheelchair.
Do we have Iron Lung rules yet, or no?
I don't know.
What about bedridden rules?
I
I literally can't leave my bedroom.
I don't know. But again, like, it just breaks the suspension of disbelief. These people, when they're portrayed in the art, don't look like they're in danger. It doesn't make any sense. How did you get your wheelchair down the broken stairs of the dungeon? It was, difficult for able-bodied people to get down the blah, blah, blah. So now I don't really feel like I'm playing a game about some thing that would be an exciting and dangerous escapade. I feel like the world's been made safe and there's no real.
Have you heard this idea of the reverse hero's journey, which isn't about you discovering and molding yourself and making yourself powerful?
Right.
It's that you start powerful.
Oh.
And you need to recognize that about yourself and make other people realize it. So the
sounds like Sauron's journey.
it's the journey.
Am I wrong?
Heal before me.
That's literally what. Am I wrong?
No, but it's often the case if you have a property with, say, like Marvel does the film with the female protagonist, you go, hang on, the character is already able to defeat the villain. The main villain gets booted in the first 5 minutes by the female protagonist. The journey is actually not about the self-sacrifice and struggle. It's about that she needs to realize how amazing she is.
But that's why that's the villain's journey. That's literally the villain's journey. I'm amazing. I'm going to impose that on everyone around me.
Yeah.
What?
But hence the facial expression. I think what I'm proposing is that it's likewise here. That
it could well be
the person isn't. The joy of it is not feeling like you're in danger. We like properties where we're like genuinely struggling. We have flaws and we actually might die because we're not all powerful.
Yeah.
Versus, I'm proposing potentially the appeal of this for the people enjoying it is the world realizing how awesome the main character actually is.
Yeah. Again, it's about the recognition of equality.
It's more like, in the, I guess, I don't know, I'd better not do spoilers. I was going to talk about the new Dune movie.
I haven't actually seen it.
Well, I won't. I'll avoid that point because your poor listeners.
Okay. Well, just a quick thing then. So you've got people saying, well, look, you can believe in magic, but you have trouble believing a person in a wheelchair can dodge, which again brings us back to the internal consistency of a universe. In all other ways, it's assumed that physics works the same. And so, yes, it's more difficult to dodge an attack in a wheelchair in the same way that I can accept dragons, elves, and talking trees, but I can't accept a 2021 BMW 5 Series 530i with optional heated seating. Why am I so bigoted? I mean, it's literally this meme.
Yeah, that's a great meme.
It's exactly.
It perfectly communicates the point.
Yes.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Brokenomics series, this episode with Aaron McIntyre. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.